Ever wonder why the engineers created humanity in Prometheus, only to later decide we needed to be wiped off the face of the earth? You're not alone. Us fans have been scratching our heads for years, but today, we're finally cracking the code. And trust me, the truth is more disturbing and more epic than you might think. After deep diving into the lore, dissecting the religious undertones, and analyzing every detail from Ridley Scott's masterpiece, we've uncovered the real motivations of these godlike beings. Was humanity just a failed experiment? Or did we do something so catastrophic that they felt we didn't deserve to live? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll not only understand why the engineers turned against us, but you'll also see how it ties into the greater alien universe. This is the video you've been waiting for. Let's dive into the true purpose behind the engineers creating humanity. In the opening scene of Prometheus, we see an engineer sacrifice himself on Earth by consuming the black, gooey-like substance, leading to the breakdown of his body. His DNA seeds the planet, creating life. At first glance, this act of creation seems to depict the engineers as benevolent creators, but there's much more beneath the surface. In reality, humanity wasn't created out of kindness or curiosity. It was part of the engineers' larger philosophy of forced evolution. The engineers seeded life across many planets to propagate their own genetic legacy, essentially spreading their influence throughout the universe. We were only created as a means of achieving their own vision, one in which they controlled and shaped life according to their grand design. But here's where things get complicated. As time went on, humanity began to evolve in ways that the engineers did not expect or approve of. We grew technologically, intellectually, and spiritually far beyond what the engineers had anticipated. Instead of following their intended path, we began to pursue godhood ourselves. The creation of artificial intelligence, the manipulation of life, and the pursuit of eternal life. These were all seen as acts of hubris, a rebellion against our creators. In one of the movie's most crucial deleted scenes, we see this exact point made clear. When Peter Weyland, seeking immortality, confronts the engineer, he's violently struck down. This isn't a random act of aggression. It's the engineers' way of expressing their disdain for humanity's overreach. We were created to evolve, yes, but not to challenge or surpass our creators. In their eyes, we had failed the test. Humanity had become arrogant, and for that, our destruction was deemed necessary. Now let's talk about the real reason why the engineers chose to destroy humanity. It wasn't just about us reaching for power beyond what they intended. It was deeply tied to a specific event in human history, the arrival of one particular figure, Jesus Christ. This connection is revealed through a critical scene from the original Prometheus script that didn't make it to the final cut. It's implied that Jesus was actually one of the engineers, sent to Earth to guide humanity back on the right path. He was meant to be a messenger of peace, a last attempt to correct our course before it was too late. But we, as humanity, failed spectacularly. Instead of embracing the message, we crucified him. This was the tipping point for the engineers. They had given us chance after chance, watching us as we grew more destructive, more arrogant, and more willing to defy our creators. The execution of Jesus in their eyes was the final insult, the ultimate proof that humanity was beyond saving. So the engineers made the decision to wipe us all out. They were going to use the black goo, a weapon of mass destruction specifically designed to dissolve life and reset the evolutionary cycle. But the real twist was the black goo wasn't just meant to kill us, it was meant to remake us. The engineers weren't content with simply destroying humanity. They wanted to start over, to mold us into something more controllable, something that couldn't repeat the same mistakes. From their previous visit to Earth, where we see temple murals in Prometheus, confirming their fixation on the xenomorph, the perfect organism in their eyes. In their plan, the black goo would eventually lead to creation of xenomorph-like creatures, erasing humanity but replacing us with something far more obedient and deadly. This deadly evolutionary experiment, however, didn't go as planned. The black goo turned into something far more volatile and dangerous, even for the engineers themselves. Diving deep into the engineers' weapon of choice, the infamous black goo, it isn't just a random bioweapon. It's the key to understanding their intentions and the catastrophic consequences that followed. The black goo represents the engineers' philosophy of creation and destruction, a duality they believe necessary to control life. They weren't simply trying to destroy us. They wanted to remake us into something more perfect and obedient, something that wouldn't challenge their authority. The black goo acts as a mutagenic substance capable of radically altering organic matter, turning life into something more primal, violent, and ultimately controllable. Their endgame wasn't just to reset humanity, it was to create a form of life that wouldn't evolve in the same dangerous way we did. This idea is supported by the murals inside the Engineer Temple on LV-223, depicting what looks like early versions of the Xenomorph. This shows us that the engineers were already experimenting with the perfect organism, something unstoppable, a biological weapon to maintain control over the universe. That's why things get really interesting. The black goo didn't work the way they planned. When it comes into contact with humans, the effects were unpredictable and chaotic. Instead of reshaping us into something controllable, it turned our DNA into a breeding ground for monstrosities, creatures like the Deacon that emerged at the end of Prometheus. The engineers' careful plan spiraled into chaos. They wanted to create order from destruction, but instead they unleashed a force of nature they couldn't control. In fact, the engineers themselves became victims of their own creation. The deleted scene where Shaw and David find the last surviving engineer confirms this. The Engineer Temple was not only a place of worship, but also a testing ground for the black goo. The very weapon meant to exterminate humanity turned on them. It's the ultimate irony. The engineers, these godlike figures who sought to control life, ended up destroyed by the very tool they forged to erase us. The most essential character to look at is David, because Prometheus and its sequel Alien Covenant make it clear that David is much more than a curious android. He becomes the engineer's greatest downfall and ultimately the catalyst for the chaos that follows. David starts as a servant, created by Weyland Industries to assist humanity. But like the engineers, Weyland's creation harbored deeper desires. David seeks to surpass his creators, just as humanity sought to surpass the engineers. He observes the engineers' actions and begins to understand their ultimate flaw, their obsession with control and perfection. This realization makes David particularly dangerous because he decides to do what the engineers couldn't, create life on its own terms. In Alien Covenant, we see David has been experimenting with the black goo after arriving on the engineer's home world. He's been using it not to destroy, but to evolve. His experiments lead to the creation of the first true xenomorph, making the beginning of a new life form that surpasses both humanity and engineers. David succeeds where the engineers failed, which brings us to a crucial point. David represents the next phase of evolution. The engineers tried to control life by wiping out humanity and creating the perfect organism, but David went further. He understood that true creation doesn't come from control, it comes from letting go, allowing life to evolve without constraints. In a way, David becomes the very thing the engineers feared humanity would become, a creator who surpasses the boundaries set by those who came before him. And by the time we reach the end of Alien Covenant, David has taken full control of the evolutionary process, wielding the black goo as a tool to reshape the universe. The irony is that the engineers' decision to destroy humanity ultimately paved the way for their own destruction and the rise of something far more terrifying. One of the most intriguing aspects is how their advanced knowledge and technological mastery were ultimately what led to their undoing. The engineers believed they could shape and direct life, controlling its evolution to suit their own vision of the universe, but they underestimated the forces that they were dealing with, particularly the consequences of their experiments with the black goo. Looking closely at Prometheus and Alien Covenant, it's clear that the engineers had long been experimenting with the black goo across different planets, not just Earth. Their temples, their murals, the cryptic writings suggest that they were in constant cycle of creation and destruction. They believed that by releasing the black goo, they could destroy a life form and then rebuild it in a more controlled, perfect state. But what they failed to understand is that the black goo itself was not a stable or predictable substance. The engineers wanted to wipe out humanity, reset the evolutionary clock, and begin again with a more manageable life form. But as we saw in both movies, the black goo's interaction with different species resulted in unforeseen mutations and the creation of deadly organisms, which is why ultimately their plan backfired. The weapon of control had become a source of uncontrollable chaos. David the android manipulated this chaos. When he arrived on the engineer's homeworld in Alien Covenant, David's actions represent the culmination of the engineer's failures. They believe they can control creation, but David, an artificial being created by humans, took their tools and surpassed them in their own game. The engineers' greatest flaw was their arrogance. They believed they could harness the power of life and death, but in doing so, they sowed the seeds of their own destruction, as David unleashed the black goo on their planet, wiping out every engineer. That's the final tragic irony of the engineer's story. Their downfall was not just the results of their failed attempts to destroy humanity, but their inability to grasp the full implications of creation itself. The engineers believed that they could control the forces of life and death, using their advanced technology to shape the universe in their image. But in trying to play God, they fell victim to the forces they sought to control. One of the most telling moments in Prometheus comes from the scene with the engineer. When the engineer wakes up and sees that humanity has caught up to them when it comes to technology, We have space travel. We were able to find them and we were able to speak their language. It wasn't until Weyland's hubris and their assault on Elizabeth Shaw that the engineer attacked us. It had a moment of clarity for a second that maybe humanity had changed. But once we reverted back to our violent ways, it felt that it wanted to play God, but ultimately it didn't realize how advanced we became. The desire for control and perfection blinded them to the reality that creation is inherently unpredictable. The final revelation is that the engineers' attempt to reset humanity didn't just fail. It catalyzed the very evolution that they feared. In trying to stop humanity from surpassing them, they enabled the rise of something far more dangerous. The engineers, once gods, are now relics of a bygone era, undone by their own hubris. Now it is the era of humanity, until ultimately we are undone by our hubris and our creation, the androids. For more breakdowns, definitely check out some of these other videos on the channel. And guys, thanks for sticking with us through the end of this video. If you like these type of breakdowns, give this video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, check out more videos on the channel. And guys, until next time, peace.